Simone Ashford was 34 years old when Diane and Vanessa called her into the glass conference room she had furnished herself. They told her the company was restructuring her position away. Too rigid, too resistant to change. What they needed now was someone younger, someone hungrier, someone like Brianna, the marketing director whose name Simone had seen an hour earlier on an email that wasn't meant for her. An email mentioning a condo and our place. And Simone's own husband. Diane smiled while she said it, the same practiced smile she used at shareholder dinners. She didn't know Simone had spent 6 years quietly holding the debt that had saved this company from collapse. She didn't know whose signature actually controlled Ashford Group. She told Simone to clear her desk by 5. Simone nodded, gathered her things, and walked to the parking garage without a word. Then she picked up her phone, dialed a number only one other person had, and said 4 words that would end everything they'd built. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The lights in the Ashford Group building came on in sections. First the lobby, then the elevator bank, then the long hallway on the 4th floor, one fluorescent panel blinking awake after another, each one casting a pale glow over empty desks and silent phones. Simone Whitfield Ashford was already at hers. She had been there since 6:40, coffee going cold on her right, a yellow legal pad covered in her small, tight handwriting on her left. The quarterly vendor report open on her screen, numbers arranged in rows she had already read twice and was now reading a 3rd time. She did this most mornings, not because anyone asked her to, because nobody else would. The 4th floor held the operations department, 12 people when fully staffed, 10 right now because 2 positions had been frozen since March, and Diane hadn't approved the replacement hires yet. Simone had submitted the request 4 times. She kept a folder with every submission, every date stamp, every auto-reply confirming receipt. She kept folders for everything. The vendor contract with Harlow Logistics was set to renew in 11 days. The rate increase buried in the renewal terms. A quiet 9.4% bump on cold storage freight would add just over $40,000 to the annual operations budget if nobody caught it. Simone had caught it 2 weeks ago. She'd already drafted a counterproposal and scheduled a call with Harlow's regional manager for Thursday morning. She made a note on the legal pad. Confirm Thursday call. Copy no one until final terms. She had learned that early. Copy too many people and suddenly there were opinions. Suddenly Vanessa was on the phone with Harlow's VP wanting to align on strategy, and the leverage Simone had spent 3 days building evaporated in a single lunch she wasn't invited to. So she kept things quiet until they were done. The building filled up slowly around her. She heard the elevator open, heard voices in the kitchen down the hall, heard the particular rhythm of the day assembling itself. She didn't look up. Her phone buzzed at 8:17. Running late, don't wait up. She read Grant's message once, set the phone face down on the desk. He'd said the same thing last Tuesday, and the Thursday before that. Late nights at client dinners, he said. Regional sales push, he said. She had stopped asking for details sometime around February, not because she didn't notice the distance, but because asking Grant a direct question was like pressing your hand against smoke. He shifted. He softened. He said things like, "You know how it is," and "I'll make it up to you." And somehow the conversation ended without a single actual answer. She had married a man who was very good at that. The 10 o'clock staff meeting was in Conference Room B. Diane Ashford arrived 4 minutes late, which was her custom. She liked the room already seated when she walked in. She set her leather portfolio on the table, the same one she'd carried for 15 years, dark cognac calfskin, initialed in gold, and looked around the table with the warm, controlled smile she wore the way other women wore jewelry. "Let's get started," she said. "We have a lot to cover." Diane was 61 and looked 53. She wore her silver hair short and sharp. Every word she said in a meeting landed like it had been planned 3 sentences in advance, because it usually had been. Vanessa sat to her left, already scrolling her tablet, already projecting the low-grade impatience she brought to most meetings where she wasn't the one presenting. Simone sat across the table and 2 seats down. She had the Harlow summary printed, a backup copy in her folder, and the 1-page brief on the staffing freeze ready if anyone asked. Nobody had asked in 4 months, but she brought it anyway. The meeting moved through the usual items. Marketing first. Brianna Voss stood to present the Q3 campaign rollout, consumer engagement metrics, influencer partnerships, a new visual identity framework she developed for the brand's social presence. Brianna was 27. She had the kind of confidence that came from always being the most polished person in a room and knowing it. Her slides were clean and bright. Her delivery was smooth. She smiled at just the right moments and paused at others to let a good number sink in. She was talented. Simone could see that clearly, and she didn't begrudge it. What she noticed was something else. Grant was VP of Sales. He had no operational reason to comment on a marketing deck, but he laughed twice at things Brianna said, leaned forward when she pointed to the screen, offered an enthusiastic, "That's a smart angle," when she explained the new campaign targeting strategy, in a tone Simone hadn't heard him use in a meeting or anywhere else in a long time. She didn't write it down. She didn't shift in her seat. She simply noticed it the way she noticed everything, quietly, completely, and filed it away. When Brianna sat down, Diane nodded with approval. "That's exactly the kind of forward momentum we need," Diane said. She glanced briefly down the table. "Operations is important, of course, but sometimes caution can slow us down. We need people who are willing to move fast." Vanessa tilted her head slightly, not quite a nod, not quite a smile, just an expression that said, "Yes, exactly," without having to commit to saying it. Simone looked at Diane. "I agree," she said simply. The meeting moved on. She was back at her desk by 11:15. The Harlow notes were in front of her. She was drafting a follow-up memo on the staffing freeze, the 5th one, not that she was counting, when her email notification chimed. She clicked it out of habit. The sender was Brianna Voss. The subject line was blank. The message had been sent to gashfordops@ashfordgroup.com, a routing alias that sometimes misfired to her address when the sender typed too quickly and the system auto-completed the wrong Ashford. It had happened before with vendor emails, with calendar invites. Not like this. "Can't stop thinking about last night. Tell me you cleared your schedule for Thursday. I already talked to the building manager about our place. He said the keys will be ready. Keep this between us for now, okay? I don't want it turning into a whole thing before we figure out the next steps. Miss you already." Simone read it once. She read it again. The office noise continued around her. Keyboards, a distant phone ringing, someone laughing in the kitchen. None of it reached her. There was a strange stillness inside her chest, not quite pain, not quite anything she had a word for yet, just a silence where something used to be. Her hand was steady when she moved the mouse. She forwarded the email to her personal account. Then she opened the notification panel, deleted the message from her work inbox, and closed the window. The quarterly report was still open on the other half of her screen. The numbers sat in their rows, patient and indifferent. She picked up her pen and went back to work. Grant's text came at 7:49. "Still at the office. Don't hold dinner. This one might run late." Simone read it standing at the kitchen counter, a glass of water in her hand. The kitchen was clean. The overhead light was warm. Everything looked exactly the way it always did. She set the glass down and went upstairs to her home office. The room was small and orderly. A mahogany desk, 2 locking file cabinets against the wall, a second laptop, personal, not company-issued, that she used for her own financial work. She sat down, pulled her hair back, and opened the company's operations portal using her VP credentials. She didn't cry. She didn't pace. She didn't call anyone. She started with the expense reports. As VP of Operations, she had full access to the vendor payment ledger. She'd built that access herself 3 years ago, after a payroll vendor had overbilled for 6 months straight because no one was cross-checking the invoices. She had caught it, fixed it, and made sure she'd never be in the dark again. She typed in the date range, January through the current quarter, and filtered by approval signature. Grant Ashford, VP of Sales. Grant didn't manage vendors. That wasn't his department. He had no operational authority to approve supplier payments. She knew that. He knew that. The company's own policy handbook said it clearly on page 41, a page she had helped write. But his signature was there. 6 times, attached to a vendor she didn't recognize, Larkspur Consulting. She typed the name into the vendor registry. It had been added 9 months ago. Category listed as Marketing Support Services. No contact name, no listed address. A bank routing number, and a post office box in the financial district. The payments ranged between $4,000 and $6,000 each, monthly. Always on the last business day of the month, always just under the threshold that would trigger a secondary approval review. Someone had known exactly where that threshold was. She pulled the original vendor onboarding form. The field for company registration number had a sequence she didn't recognize. She opened a separate browser and ran it through the state business registry. Larkspur Consulting LLC. Registered 11 months ago. Listed agent. A formation service. Listed address. A suite number in a shared office building downtown. She pulled up the building directory. The suite number didn't exist. Simone leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. 1 breath in, 1 breath out. Then she kept going. She switched to a property search database she used for vendor compliance checks, a tool meant for verifying supplier addresses before contract execution. She typed in the building's real address, cross-referenced recent lease activity in the surrounding block. It took 4 searches and 11 minutes. There it was. A residential lease, executed 10 months ago. A 1-bedroom unit in a building 2 blocks from the shell address. The leaseholder's name was listed in the associated LLC disclosure she found attached to a rental permit filing. Brianna Voss. Simone looked at the number on the screen, looked at the Larkspur payment total she'd added up in the margin of the legal pad beside her. $41,200 in 9 months. Not just an affair, a financed one. Company money, approved under a false vendor, routed to support a condo where her husband apparently had a key waiting for him. She thought of the email. He said the keys will be ready. She thought of the quarterly reports she'd been reviewing that morning, the numbers she'd read 3 times. The clean rows she trusted because she had always been the one making sure they were clean. She pulled a small black flash drive from the top drawer. She began copying files, the payment records, the vendor onboarding form, the registry result, the permit filing, the building lease document. She saved everything with dates in the file names, created a second backup copy, and labeled the folder with a name that meant nothing to anyone else. She put one drive in her desk drawer. The second one she placed in the inside pocket of her work bag. She closed the portal and shut the laptop. Grant came home at 10:53. She heard the front door, heard him set his keys on the entry table, heard the particular soft sound of a man trying not to wake anyone. She was sitting in the living room with a book she hadn't been reading. He looked tired in a way that seemed carefully arranged. "Hey," he said. "You're still up?" "Couldn't sleep," she said. He loosened his tie, sat down on the arm of the chair across from her. "Long night. Morrison account. You know how Marcus gets when the numbers aren't where he wants them." She nodded. "Did you get it sorted?" "Mostly." He gave a small, practiced smile. "I'll follow up in the morning." "Okay," she said. He kissed the top of her head on the way to the stairs. She listened to his footsteps overhead, the bathroom, the closet, the creak of the bed. She turned off the living room lamp and followed. She lay beside him in the dark. His breathing slowed within minutes. Easy, unhurried sleep. Hers didn't come, but she didn't need it to. She stared at the ceiling and ran through the list. The complete vendor payment history, the full business registration paper trail, Grant's approval log for the last fiscal year, Brianna's personnel file and expense submissions, the original Larkspur onboarding documentation, and whoever had countersigned it below Grant's name. There was still more. She knew that. She was going to get all of it. She hadn't even made it to her desk. Simone had walked through the front doors of Ashford Group at 7:52, coffee in hand, bag over one shoulder. She had slept 4 hours. She had showered, dressed, and driven in without a single word to Grant, who had still been asleep when she left. She had a list in her head of 3 more documents she needed to pull before the end of the week. She got as far as the elevator bank. "Simone." Vanessa was standing near the reception desk, arms crossed, wearing a fitted navy blazer that looked like it had been pressed twice. Her voice was pleasant in the way that meant it wasn't. "Diane wants a quick word before the morning gets away from us. Conference room B." "Of course," Simone said. She followed Vanessa down the hall without asking why. Conference room B was the smaller one, away from the main floor, no windows facing the open office. It was the room they used for HR meetings, for exits. Diane was already seated at the head of the table. She had her hands folded in front of her reading glasses pushed up onto her silver hair like a headband. She looked composed. She always looked composed. Simone had spent 6 years watching Diane arrange her face into whatever expression the room required. Right now, the expression was sympathetic, careful, almost regretful. It made the hair on Simone's arms rise slightly. She sat down across from them. She set her coffee on the table. She waited. "Thank you for coming in early," Diane began, as if Simone had been given a choice. "This isn't easy, and I want to handle it with the respect you deserve." Simone said nothing. Diane continued. "We've been doing a lot of thinking about the company's direction, where we're heading in the next phase. The board has been encouraging us to look hard at our internal structure, who's positioned for that future, and where there might be," she paused, "misalignment." "Simone," Vanessa said, taking her cue, "the honest truth is that some concerns have come up, from multiple directions." She tilted her head slightly, voice dropping into something that was meant to sound gentle. "You've always been thorough. Nobody disputes that. But thorough isn't always what the company needs right now. We need people who can move, who can pivot. There's been some feedback about you being resistant to change, rigid in how you manage process." Simone looked at her. "We need energy right now," Vanessa continued. "Hunger, the kind that, honestly, it tends to come from people who are still building something, still trying to prove themselves." She gave a small, apologetic smile. "That's just the reality of where we are. Still building, still proving. At 34. Simone understood the words perfectly. She was meant to. Diane folded her hands tighter. "We're restructuring the VP of Operations role. The responsibilities will be redistributed across existing leadership. Your position, as it currently stands, will be eliminated." She said it cleanly, like she'd practiced. "We want to make this transition as smooth as possible for you. HR will prepare a severance package. We'd ask that you clear your office by end of day." End of day. They weren't even giving her a week. Simone looked from Diane to Vanessa and back again. She thought about the 41 trousers. She thought about Grant's signature. She thought about the timestamp on Brianna's email, sent at 4 in the afternoon from inside this building, from a company device to a company address. She thought about the small black flash drive sitting in the inside pocket of her work bag, 3 feet away on the floor beside her chair. She picked up her coffee. She took one slow sip. "I understand," she said. Diane blinked. She had clearly expected more. "I appreciate you telling me directly," Simone said. Her voice was even, unhurried. "I'll have the office cleared by this afternoon." She stood, picked up her bag, and walked to the door. "Simone," Diane's voice followed her, still warm, still carefully managed. "You've contributed a great deal here. I hope you know that." Simone paused with her hand on the doorframe. She didn't turn around. "I do know that," she said quietly. Then she walked out. She cleared her desk in 40 minutes. She was efficient about it, the way she was efficient about everything. She smiled at 2 junior coordinators who passed her door. She signed the IT checkout form. She handed in her keycard without being asked. She rode the elevator down to the parking garage alone. Her car was on level 2, near the far wall. She sat down in the driver's seat, placed her bag on the passenger seat, and closed the door. The garage was dim and quiet. Somewhere above her, the building hummed along like nothing had happened. She took out her phone and called Desmond. He picked up on the second ring. "Simone?" "They just fired me," she said. A short pause. "When?" "An hour ago." She looked straight ahead at the concrete wall. "Called it a restructuring." "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said it without hesitation, because it was true. She felt completely, startlingly calm. "I need you to move on the covenant, today." "Say the word." She took one breath. "Fire them all," she said evenly. "They work for my company." She hung up. The cafe was small and unremarkable. That was the point. Desmond had chosen it years ago for exactly that reason. No one from the financial district came here. No leather chairs, no networking lunches, no faces Simone might recognize from a boardroom. Just a narrow room with 6 tables, a counter that smelled like cinnamon, and a window facing a side street that nobody used. Simone pushed through the door at 10:47. Desmond was already there. He had taken the corner table, the one with its back to the wall. A folder sat closed in front of him. 2 coffees were waiting. He stood when she walked in. He always did. Not performatively, just a habit, the way certain things about Desmond were simply built in. "Sit," she told him. He sat. She slid into the chair across from him, set her bag on the floor, and wrapped both hands around the warm cup. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Desmond looked at her the way he always looked at her when he was trying to take stock without being obvious about it. 6 years of practice, and he still wasn't as subtle as he thought. "I'm fine," she said, before he could ask. "I know you are," he said. "That's not actually what I was thinking." "What were you thinking?" "That they had no idea what they just did." He said it without satisfaction, just plainly, the way he stated most true things. Simone almost smiled. He opened the folder. She knew the story by heart, but Desmond laid it out anyway. That was how they worked. Everything spoken aloud, everything confirmed, not assumed. 6 years ago, Ashford Group had been in serious trouble. Diane had made 3 consecutive acquisition decisions that didn't pan out, each one worse than the last. She had dismissed the warnings from her own financial team, publicly blamed a market downturn that only partially explained the losses, and burned through the company's reserve capital, trying to correct course in a hurry. By the spring of that year, Ashford Group was carrying $42 million in distressed debt and had 2 quarters, maybe 3, before the structure collapsed entirely. Simone had been married to Grant for 1 year at that point. She had been working inside the company for 18 months. She had watched Diane make every single one of those decisions from a junior operations role, had seen the warning signs before anyone with a title had bothered to look. She had also recently received her grandmother's estate. Her grandmother, Dorothy Whitfield, had been a careful woman. Not rich in any visible way. She'd lived in the same house for 40 years, driven the same car for 12, and never once talked about money unless she was teaching Simone something about it. What she left behind wasn't flashy, but it was real. Conservatively invested over decades, well protected. Substantial enough, when Simone sat with it, to matter. She had called Desmond the same week she received it. "I want to buy the debt," she had told him, anonymously. He had been quiet for a long time. Then he'd said, "Walk me through your thinking." She had, every piece of it, the structure, the risk, the play, the change of control covenant she wanted written into the deal, a clause that would give Whitfield Capital authority to intervene in leadership decisions if specific triggering conditions were ever met. Desmond had served as the public-facing managing partner. His name was on the filings. His face was in the meetings. Diane had dealt with Whitfield Capital for 6 years and had never once asked who owned it. She had written the investment off as routine institutional debt, a ghost on paper that required nothing of her. That was exactly what Simone had intended. The triggering conditions, Desmond said now, turning to the second page of the document. He ran his finger down the clause. Retaliatory termination of a key operational officer, documented financial misconduct by a named executive, evidence of material misrepresentation to the parent entity. He looked up. You satisfy all three. Which three? Your firing covers the first. He tapped the page. Grant's shell vendor payments cover the second, and the manipulated quarterly reports, if they were used to conceal the fraud from the board, that's the third. Simone nodded slowly. Invoking the clause forces an emergency board meeting, he continued. Whitfield Capital calls the meeting. The board has to attend. It has to be formal, documented. Good, she said. I want it formal. Simone. He said her name carefully. Once we invoke this, it moves fast. I know. There's no quiet version after this point. I know that too. She looked at him steadily. I'm not doing this angry, Desmond. I'm doing this correctly. There's a difference. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, once. How do you want to sequence it? Grant first, she said. I need to speak to him before the paperwork moves. Not to warn him, not to give him a chance to fix anything. She paused. I just need him to hear it from me, directly, before the rest of it happens. She finished the last of her coffee and set the cup down. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out the small black flash drive, and placed it on the table between them. Get the paperwork ready, she said. I'll call you tonight. The house was quiet when Simone pulled into the driveway. Grant's car was already there. She sat for a moment before going inside. Not to collect herself. She was already collected. She just wanted one last breath of outside air before she walked into whatever version of Grant she was about to get. She already knew it wouldn't be the right one. He was in the kitchen when she came through the door. Jacket still on, loosened tie, glass of wine poured and mostly finished. He turned when he heard her. Babe. He said it like a question. Hey. She set her bag down on the counter and moved to the refrigerator. I heard what happened. Marcus texted me. He paused. Why didn't you call me? She pulled out a bottle of water, turned around, and leaned against the counter. What did Marcus say? Just that you were let go, that there was a restructuring. He dragged a hand through his hair. I mean, Simone, this is going to look bad. People are going to talk. She looked at him, not with anger, just looked. People are going to talk, she repeated. You know how it is. You've been with the company for years. If it gets out that they restructured you out, people are going to ask questions. It reflects on the family. He shook his head. I wish you'd called me. I could have, I don't know, said something to my mother. Would you have? He blinked. What? If I'd called you, she said, would you actually have said something to your mother? The question hung there. Grant opened his mouth and then didn't quite close it, the way he did when he was searching for an answer that sounded better than the truth. Of course I would have, he finally said. Simone nodded like she believed him. She didn't. She took a sip of water. Have you checked the business account lately? There were some vendor charges I was looking at before everything happened. Larkspur, the consulting line. I wanted to make sure the Q3 reconciliation was going to be clean. Grant went very still. It was subtle. Most people would have missed it. But Simone had been watching Grant Ashford for 7 years. She knew every small tell he had. The way his jaw tightened slightly. The way his fingers stopped moving on the counter. It's fine, he said. Nothing to worry about. The payment seemed irregular. I said it's fine. His voice had that careful flatness now, the one that meant stop pushing. It was a consulting arrangement. It got handled. Okay, she nodded. Good to know. She left it there and walked upstairs to change. Her phone rang at 9:14. Diane. Simone sat on the edge of the bed and answered on the second ring. Hello, Diane? Simone? Diane's voice was warm the way marble is warm, a surface temperature, nothing underneath. I wanted to reach out personally. I know today was difficult, and I want to make sure you're taken care of. That's thoughtful. We're prepared to offer a very generous severance, 14 months, full benefits continuation, and a strong letter of recommendation. A brief pause, precisely timed. I had legal draw up a straightforward NDA, nothing unusual. Just protecting the company during the transition, you understand. I understand what an NDA is. Of course you do. A small, practiced laugh. I just want this to be handled gracefully, for everyone's sake. You've been part of this family, and I want it to stay that way. Simone said nothing. Diane filled the silence. These transitions can get messy when people let their emotions take over, especially when… Another pause, deliberate this time. Well, there's been some concern, privately, from a few people in our circle about how you've been lately. The stress, the sensitivity. I'd hate for that kind of perception to take hold if things became complicated. There it was, said with warmth, said like a favor. Sign this paper or I'll tell everyone you're falling apart. An aging woman, hormonal, unstable, difficult. Every soft, quiet word that meant she's nothing to take seriously anymore. Simone kept her voice completely even. I won't be signing anything tonight, Diane. A beat. I'd encourage you to think carefully. I have thought carefully, Simone said. I'll be in touch through my attorney. She ended the call and set the phone on the nightstand. For a moment, she just sat there, in the quiet of a bedroom she had picked out the furniture for, in a house she had bought before she even knew she was buying it for him, too. Then she opened her laptop and pulled up their joint checking account. She wasn't looking for the affair anymore. She already knew about the affair. She was looking at money now. Her money. The account she had contributed to for 6 years, because that was what you did when you were building something with someone. She scrolled back 3 months, then 6. The amounts were not enormous, that was the point, small enough to look like nothing. 200 here, 350 there, a restaurant she'd never been to, a charge from a jeweler she'd never heard of, a weekend hotel stay on a Thursday when Grant told her he was at a conference in Charlotte. She kept scrolling. She counted quietly, the way her grandmother had taught her to count anything that mattered. $4,260. Her money, spent on another woman. Desmond's office smelled like coffee and old paper. It always had. There was something steady about that smell, something that had never changed. Simone set the folder on his desk at 8:47 in the morning. He opened it without being asked. He went through it the same way he went through everything. Slowly, page by page, not skimming. His eyes moved with the quiet focus of someone who understood that details were where the truth actually lived. She watched him get to the bank statements, watched him stop. 4,000 and change, she said. He looked up. From your personal contribution side of the account? Every dollar. He closed the folder. He didn't say, I'm sorry, or that's awful, or any of the other things people said when they didn't know what else to do. He just looked at her with steady eyes and asked, Are you ready to file? Yes. He picked up his pen. The paperwork took most of the morning. Desmond moved through it with the kind of calm that came from knowing exactly what he was doing. He filed the formal invocation of Whitfield Capital's change of control covenant with the board's external compliance office at 11:22. The filing cited 2 triggering conditions. The first, retaliatory termination of a key operational officer. Simone's firing, documented with dates, her performance record, and the internal communications that made the timing impossible to explain any other way. The second, financial misconduct by senior leadership. The Larkspur consulting payments, the Shell vendor trail, the manipulated quarterly reports, Grant's signature on every approval line, all of it attached, all of it clean. The filing named Desmond Reeves as managing partner of Whitfield Capital Holdings. It did not name Simone. That was by design. Had been by design for 6 years. She had always understood that the most powerful position was the one nobody knew existed. By 1 o'clock, the board's external secretary had sent formal notice to all 6 board members. By 1:45, Simone's phone showed a missed call from Vanessa. She didn't answer it. She heard about the panic secondhand, which was exactly how she wanted it. A junior analyst she'd mentored for 2 years, a quiet young woman named Priya, who had no idea what was coming but knew enough to be loyal, sent a single text message that afternoon. "People are freaking out up here. Something about an outside investor and an emergency meeting. Vanessa's been in Diane's office for 2 hours. Do you know what's happening?" Simone typed back, "I'm sure it'll get sorted out. Keep your head down." She could picture it clearly. Diane behind her desk, phone pressed to her ear, calling every contact she had. Vanessa pulling up the original debt agreement and reading it too fast, missing things, trying to figure out who was behind the Whitfield Capital name. Grant probably didn't even know yet. Diane would keep him out of it until she understood what she was dealing with. Because that was what Diane always did. She managed information like currency, only spending it when she had to. The problem was, she'd never thought to ask where the money actually came from. None of them had. The next 2 days moved slowly on the surface and fast underneath. Simone pulled every remaining record she needed. She verified the vendor trail one more time, added 3 additional months of bank data, and printed clean copies of everything. 2 sets, both numbered. She pulled Brianna's promotion paperwork from a file she'd saved before her work access was revoked. Director of Marketing to Senior Vice President of Brand Strategy, effective the 1st of the month. Grant's countersignature was on page 2. Vanessa's approval was on page 3. She added it to the folder. She also wrote out, by hand, the full sequence of events, not for the board, for herself. Her grandmother had told her once that when something mattered, you wrote it down in your own hand so that you could never pretend later that you hadn't known exactly what you were doing. She knew exactly what she was doing. On the second evening, Desmond called to confirm the board meeting was set for 9 o'clock the following morning. All 6 members confirmed. Diane had apparently tried to delay it, citing a scheduling conflict. The board had declined the request. The covenant didn't allow for delays. That was also by design. "You should sleep," Desmond said. "I will." "Simone." "I said I will, Desmond." A pause. "Okay." She did sleep, actually, better than she had in weeks, the kind of sleep that came not from peace exactly, but from having nothing left to prepare. The morning of the board meeting came in gray and cool, a thin layer of clouds sitting low over the city. Simone stood at her closet for less than a minute. She already knew what she was wearing. She pulled out the navy suit, the one she'd had for 6 years, the one she'd worn the day she sat across from a distressed debt broker and signed the papers that quietly saved a company that didn't even know her name yet. It still fit perfectly. She put it on. The lobby of Ashford Group looked the same as it always had. Marble floors, a high ceiling with recessed lighting, the company name etched in brushed steel above the reception desk. A young woman at the front desk who recognized Simone and looked immediately uncertain, like she didn't know whether to smile or look away. Simone smiled for her. "Good morning, Keisha." "Good morning, Ms. Whitfield Ashford." The girl's voice was careful. She'd clearly heard something. Simone walked past the desk without slowing down. Desmond was 1 step behind her, his briefcase in one hand and a second file box in the other. He wore his charcoal suit, the one he wore to every meeting where something significant was about to happen. He didn't say anything in the elevator. Neither did she. There was nothing left to say. The boardroom was on the 4th floor, at the end of the long hallway with the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. Simone had walked that hallway hundreds of times. She had walked it carrying crisis reports and budget corrections and vendor contracts. She had walked it while Diane called her rigid and Vanessa looked through her like she wasn't there. She walked it now in the navy suit. She pushed open the boardroom door. 6 people were already seated around the long table. 4 of them were outside board members, older, composed, the kind of people who wore patience like a coat. They looked up when she entered, but showed nothing on their faces. Diane sat at the far end of the table. She was dressed in her usual armor, cream blazer, perfect posture, the kind of expression that was designed to make everyone in the room feel slightly off balance. She looked at Simone, and then at Desmond, and then back at Simone, and something moved behind her eyes, a small flicker of something she didn't let become anything yet. Vanessa sat to Diane's left. She had her tablet in front of her and her arms crossed, and the specific look of someone who had spent 2 sleepless days trying to solve a problem she didn't have enough information to solve. When she saw Simone, her jaw tightened. Grant sat 3 chairs down from his mother, not beside her, not close to anyone. He was wearing a tie that looked like he'd knotted it twice, and his hands were flat on the table in front of him, very still in the way that people were still when they were working hard not to show that they were scared. He didn't look at Simone when she entered. She looked at him. Then she took her seat at the opposite end of the table from Diane. Desmond set the file box down, opened his briefcase, and laid the documentation out in a clean row without any ceremony. He waited until the room settled. "Good morning," he said. "My name is Desmond Reeves. I am the managing partner of Whitfield Capital Holdings and the filing party in this proceeding." His voice was even and clear. "I appreciate the board's prompt response to the invocation notice. I'll keep my opening brief." He identified the 2 triggering conditions. He named them plainly. Retaliatory termination of a key operational officer, citing dates and Simone's documented performance record. Financial misconduct by senior leadership, citing the Larkspur consulting payments, the Shell vendor trail, and the manipulated quarterly reports with Grant's signature on each approval line. He did not editorialize. He did not raise his voice. He simply stated what the documents showed, and the documents were very clear. When he finished, Diane set both hands flat on the table. "That's a significant set of accusations," she said. Her voice was controlled but had an edge under it. "Before we go any further, I want to know exactly who we're dealing with. Who is behind Whitfield Capital? Because I've never met this firm's principal. Not once in 6 years." Desmond looked at her for one steady moment. Then he turned and looked at Simone. The room followed his gaze. Simone stood. She didn't rush it. She let the silence hold for just a moment, the way her grandmother had taught her, back when she was 12 years old, and learning that the person who spoke first usually had something to prove. She had nothing to prove. "I am," she said. "I'm the majority owner and principal of Whitfield Capital Holdings. I have been since the debt purchase 6 years ago, when this company was 11 weeks from insolvency." She kept her voice level. "You were saved by an anonymous investor, Diane. That investor was me." The room was very quiet. One of the outside board members leaned back slightly in his chair. Another made a small note on the paper in front of him. Vanessa's face had gone still in a way that wasn't composure. It was the stillness of someone whose understanding of the last 6 years had just quietly collapsed. Grant finally looked up. His expression was hard to name, something between shock and a recognition he didn't want to have. Diane stared at Simone. The armor was still there, but beneath it, something had shifted. The careful certainty she always carried, the absolute belief that she understood the board, the company, and every person in it, was gone. Simone opened her folder. "I have 3 matters to bring before the board this morning," she said. "Financial fraud, retaliatory termination, and personal misconduct." She looked toward the door and then at the board member nearest to it. "Before I begin, I'd like Brianna Voss brought into the room." Brianna Voss walked into the boardroom the way she walked into most rooms, with her chin up and her shoulders back and the practiced ease of someone who had learned early that confidence was a costume anyone could put on. She was wearing a fitted gray blazer. Her hair was down. She had the look of someone who had been called away from something important and expected to be sent back to it shortly. She stopped when she saw Simone. It was brief, just a half-second pause at the door, something crossing her face that she smoothed over quickly. Then she scanned the rest of the room and found Grant, and she moved toward the chair nearest to him without being told to sit down. Grant did not look at her. She looked at him once, then away. Simone watched all of it. She said nothing. She simply waited until Brianna was seated and the door had closed again behind the board member who had escorted her in. Then she began. 6 years ago, Simone said, I saved this company from collapse. I did it quietly, and I did it through Whitfield Capital, because I understood that the people running this company at the time were not ready to accept help from someone they saw as peripheral. She paused. That hasn't changed. So I adjusted my approach. She laid the first set of documents in the center of the table. Copies fanned outward, one for each board member. What you're looking at is a vendor account registered under the name Larkspur Consulting. Larkspur received 42 payments over 14 months, each one approved by Grant Ashford, VP of Sales, under the quarterly discretionary vendor budget. She turned one page to show the approval signatures. Clear, repeated. Larkspur Consulting does not exist as a legal business entity. I confirmed that 3 days ago through a state registration search. She placed that document next to the first. What does exist, registered at the same address listed on the Larkspur invoices, is a residential condo lease, signed by Brianna Voss. The room didn't move. Brianna's chin came down about an inch. The payments to Larkspur total $112,000. Simone's voice didn't change. It was the same tone she used in quarterly reviews and vendor negotiations. Steady, precise. Those funds were routed through manipulated budget line items across 3 reporting periods. The quarterly reports submitted to this board during that time contained figures that did not reflect actual operational costs. I have the original figures here, alongside the submitted versions. She placed both sets down. The board member who had been making notes was now making more of them. Simone turned one page and held it so the table could see. There is a second matter. She reached into her folder. Following my termination 2 days ago, I reviewed our joint bank account, mine and Grant's. What I found was a series of withdrawals I did not authorize and did not benefit from. 41 separate transactions over 16 months. Restaurants, jewelers, a hotel booking in February, a weekend booking in April. She set the bank statement down with the relevant transactions circled in red. I funded my own husband's affair with my own money. I want the board to understand that clearly. The silence that followed was total. Grant's hands were no longer flat on the table. They were in his lap, out of sight. Diane opened her mouth. Simone, I'm not finished. Simone said it without sharpness, just fact. She looked at the board. Diane Ashford will claim she had no knowledge of the financial manipulation. I want to address that before she does. She pulled the next set of pages. These are internal communications from 8 weeks ago. They are emails exchanged between Vanessa Ashford Cole and the head of HR, recommending Brianna Voss for a senior promotion to VP of Marketing. The recommendation was processed over a formal performance flag that HR had already placed in Brianna's file the prior quarter. She set the emails down. Vanessa knew about the flag and overrode it. The emails show she was aware of the situation with Grant and chose to advance Brianna's position anyway. Not for performance reasons, but to consolidate internal support and marginalize my standing in the company. She looked at Vanessa directly. That is documented here. Vanessa said nothing. The color had left her face. Simone closed the folder. She stood straight and looked at the board. As majority owner of Whitfield Capital Holdings, and as the triggering authority under the change of control covenant in the original debt agreement, I am exercising my right to make the following leadership changes, effective immediately. She said each name clearly and without hesitation. Diane Ashford is removed as Chief Executive Officer. Vanessa Ashford Cole is removed as Chief Operating Officer. Grant Ashford's executive title is terminated. Brianna Voss is dismissed for cause. She looked toward the board's senior member. I'm requesting security escort all 4 individuals from the premises. The vote to ratify her emergency leadership authority took 4 minutes. It was unanimous. Security arrived quickly. 2 officers who stood at the door with the specific stillness of people trained to be present without escalating. Diane rose from her chair with the slow deliberateness of someone refusing to let the room see her shaken, though the room saw it anyway. Vanessa picked up her tablet and then set it back down when one of the officers shook his head. Grant stood last. He walked toward the door, and then he stopped. He turned. "Simone?" His voice was low. There was something in it, not quite an apology, not quite a plea, something shapeless and too late. Simone was already leaning toward the board's general counsel, her folder open, her finger on the next page. "The immediate priority is the fraud referral," she said. "Let's talk about timeline." The first thing Simone did the morning after the board meeting was make coffee in the executive kitchen herself. No assistant, no ceremony. Just the machine, the grounds, and the quiet of a building that was still figuring out what had changed. She stood at the window while it brewed, and watched the parking lot fill up below. People arriving, badges swiped. A normal Tuesday that was not normal at all. They would hear soon, if they hadn't already. Word moved fast in a building like this, through whispered hallways and group texts, and the particular silence that settles around a desk that has been abruptly cleared. She poured her coffee and went to work. The divorce filing took less than an hour with Desmond's help. The paperwork was clean and the grounds were clear. What made it simple, almost surgical, was the house. Simone had bought it before the marriage. The deed had always been in her name alone. She had never changed that, not out of suspicion, but because her grandmother had raised her to keep the ground beneath her feet on solid footing. "What is yours, you keep titled," the old woman had told her once, pressing a worn leather folder into her hands the day she turned 22. "Everything else is borrowed." Grant was required to vacate within 30 days. He was gone in 12. She heard, through Desmond, that he had rented a 1-bedroom apartment across town. Modest, anonymous, the kind of place with beige walls and thin windows and no one waiting when you came home. He had called twice in the first week. She had not answered. There was nothing left in her that needed to hear what he might say. The audit took longer. A formal fraud referral to the state's Financial Regulatory Office triggered an independent review that ran for 6 weeks. Auditors moved through the Ashford Group records floor by floor, pulling files, cross-referencing line items, interviewing staff. Simone gave them full access to everything. She had nothing to hide and a great deal to confirm. The findings were thorough and damaging. Grant's role in approving the false Larkspur payments was documented and referred for civil and criminal review. The falsified quarterly reports, cross-signed in at least 2 instances by Diane, implicated her directly. Diane hired 3 lawyers in the first 2 weeks. It didn't slow the process. The industry heard about it the way industries always do, through a filing that became a news brief that became a story that got shared and discussed and forwarded to inboxes by people who had sat across from Diane Ashford at galas and lunches and charity dinners, thinking her untouchable. She was not untouchable. Within 30 days of the audit findings, Diane had resigned from the 4 other boards she held positions on. She didn't announce it. The resignations appeared quietly on regulatory filings, which was a kind of announcement all its own. Simone saw one of the filings on a Tuesday morning and moved on to the next item on her list. Vanessa's complicity, the overridden performance flag, the emails, the deliberate marginalization, became part of the public audit record. It was not a crime on its own, but it followed her. She interviewed for 2 COO roles in the months after and did not receive offers. Simone heard this secondhand and did not comment. Brianna left the state before the end of the first month. The cause-based termination had moved through professional channels the way those things do, quietly but permanently. Simone had not engineered that outcome. She had simply told the truth to the people who needed to hear it, and the truth had done its work. What took the most time, and the most care, was the people. Simone went department by department. Operations first, then finance, Then marketing, which was harder because that team had watched their director escorted out by security and had questions they didn't know how to ask. She didn't send emails. She held meetings, small ones, in the conference rooms on each floor. She stood at the front of those rooms without a slide deck and told each team what had happened in plain language, what the fraud had been, what the company's actual financial position was now, what she intended to do next, and why she believed the work they had already been doing was the foundation worth building on. A woman on the operations team, someone Simone had worked beside for 3 years, raised her hand in one of those meetings and asked, "Did you always know about owning the company?" "Yes," Simone said. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Simone thought about her grandmother's leather folder, about 6 years of early mornings and quarterly reports, and standing in hallways being told she was too cautious, too quiet, not quite what the company needed. "Because I wasn't ready to use it yet," she said, "and because the timing wasn't mine to choose, it was theirs." The room was quiet. Then the woman nodded, slowly, like something had landed exactly where it needed to. On the last Friday of the month, Simone stood in the large corner office on the executive floor, Diane's office until recently, and looked at the room with its bare walls and empty shelves and the faint rectangular outlines on the paint where framed portraits had hung for years. She turned to the facilities manager, who stood in the doorway with a clipboard. "I want this whole floor reconfigured," she said. "We're going to need 4 offices up here by end of next month." She looked at the empty walls. "I have people to move up." 1 year changes a building, not the bones of it. The glass and concrete and steel were the same, but the feeling inside had shifted, the way a room shifts when the windows are finally opened after being painted shut for years. The air moved differently. People walked differently. They looked up when they passed each other in the halls. Simone noticed all of it. She walked the main floor on a Thursday morning, coffee in hand, badge clipped to her lapel the same way it had always been. No entourage, no assistant trailing behind her with a tablet. Just her, moving through a building that now carried her name on the lobby directory in clean, simple letters. Whitfield Group. The old sign had come down 6 months ago. She hadn't made a ceremony out of it. She'd simply told the facilities team what she wanted, and they had handled it on a Wednesday afternoon while she was in a vendor call. Marcus Webb stopped her near the operations bullpen. He was 29, had been a mid-level coordinator under the old structure, someone who wrote the reports that Vanessa had taken credit for and never once been promoted, despite 3 consecutive strong performance reviews. He was operations director now. He had been for 7 months. "The Hartley contract came through," he said, holding up his phone like it was evidence. Simone smiled. "I saw. Good work." "Priya closed it," he said immediately. "She did the heavy lifting." "Tell her I said so directly," Simone said. "Don't relay it. Tell her yourself." Marcus nodded, already turning back toward his team with the kind of energy that comes from being given real work and real credit at the same time. Simone kept walking. Down on the second floor, Renata Cruz had moved into the finance director role 4 months ago after a decade of being the person who actually understood the numbers, while someone above her explained them in meetings. She was 38, meticulous, and had cried briefly in Simone's office the day she was offered the promotion. Not out of sentiment, she had explained, wiping her eyes quickly, but because she had genuinely stopped expecting it. Simone had told her that was the most honest response she'd ever heard. They passed each other in the hall now, and Renata gave her a short nod, the kind between 2 people who understand each other without needing to say much. Desmond was already in the conference room when Simone arrived for the 10 o'clock. He had a coffee in front of him and a folder open on the table and was marking something with a pen, brow slightly creased the way it always was when a contract clause was bothering him. He looked up when she walked in, and the crease smoothed out. "The Donahue terms came back," he said. "They moved on the licensing fees." "How far?" "Far enough." She sat down across from him. He slid the folder over without being asked. She read while he waited, and neither of them needed to fill the silence. That was how it had always been between them, easy and unhurried, built on years of working side by side in the same direction, toward the same things. At some point in the past year, the line between working partner and something warmer had blurred, quietly and without announcement. She noticed it in the way he still always had coffee ready when she arrived, in the way she had started calling him on Sunday evenings to talk through the week ahead, and those calls had started running long in a way that had nothing to do with business. Neither of them had named it. Neither of them was in a rush. Grant's name came up once that month, briefly from a former colleague who mentioned seeing him working as an account manager at a mid-sized logistics firm across town. Not an unkind observation, just a fact, delivered the way facts are when they've lost their charge. Simone registered it and moved on. Diane's name appeared on a small industry page she was reading over lunch, a 2-paragraph notice, the kind tucked between larger stories, announcing Diane Ashford's retirement from public business life, following what the article described, carefully, as a period of significant leadership transition. Her photo looked older than Simone remembered. Her smile looked like effort. Simone read the article once, then she closed the tab and finished her lunch. She drove to the cemetery on a Saturday afternoon, when the sky was pale blue and the air still carried a thread of last winter. Her grandmother's headstone was simple: her name, her years, and a single line the old woman had chosen herself before she died. She kept her own counsel. Simone crouched down and set a small bunch of white flowers against the base of the stone. "I used it," she said quietly. "Everything you left me. Every bit of it." The wind moved through the grass around her. She stayed a little while longer, just sitting with the quiet, thinking about what it had cost to be underestimated for so long, and what it had built in her because of it. The patience, the precision, the ability to wait until the moment was exactly right. Being celebrated might have made her comfortable. Being dismissed had made her certain. The sun was low and golden over the city by the time she got back to the office, painting the skyline in long, amber lines. She rode the elevator to the executive floor, walked through the door, and settled into her chair. The view from her window was the same one she had stood at a year ago, watching the parking lot fill on a Tuesday morning that had changed everything. She opened the next quarter's plans, picked up her pen, and got to work. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day.